No one ever says, I want to grow up to be an addict. And some people say, it's a choice. Is it? Or is it a predisposition? Did the addict start abusing drugs and alcohol because of trauma, abuse, or neglect? Or was it because of that first prescription they were given that caused them to change and decide this was a direction they wanted to go? It doesn't really matter whether it was because they started abusing drug and alcohol to self-medicate or because they were given an opiate prescription that flipped a switch in their brain. Recovery is not an easy fix. People who don't understand, assume that it should be easy. We hear comments all the time like, he should just stop. She should just get help. Or my personal favorite, Johnny should be fixed. He just got out of rehab. It would be great if it was that easy. But recovery is a road, a long road. Not a 14, 28, or even 60-day treatment program. That's getting you clean and sober. That's step one. What most people don't realize is individuals need to find and understand their why they got into this situation, why they started self-medicating, so they can address it. Science talks about the brain that changes itself. These are ongoing changes. They can be positive, they can be negative. If you have a traumatic event that gets wired in your brain, Dr. Baird can verify this, it could take years to rewire in a positive direction. And some individuals have families that walk alongside of them after a traumatic event and support them and love them and encourage them for them to get through it and to be healed. But most of us don't. People don't go around saying, I was abused, I experienced trauma. Usually they just feel shame. They feel ashamed about what happened. They feel ashamed because the abuser made them feel ashamed. Many carry around this shame for years and ultimately self-medicate with alcohol or drugs, which causes the brain to misfire even more. Often this shame of trauma is subconscious, which is what happened to Ed. Ed grew up in a very volatile, angry, alcoholic household. When he was 10, his parents were fighting, and his mother got him to laugh at his dad. Only 2 days later, his dad attempted suicide. By the grace of God, he survived. But this was hardwired into Ed's brain. And for 40 years, he subconsciously blamed himself. And most of those 40 years, he overindulged in alcohol to self-medicate. He overindulged until the impact was across the board in his life. It affected every aspect of his life, including our relationship. Fortunately, he was held accountable by me. Thankfully, as a result of his road through recovery, he no longer blames himself. Now, imagine what it does to a child who is verbally abused or beaten or worse, molested. We need to understand and help these individuals recognize their why and love them and encourage and support them through it. They need time to heal. Heal as an entire person, physically, emotionally, as well as mentally. Fortunately, UGM and Teen Challenge are two great programs that are long enough for individuals to have a better chance for a long-lasting changes and improvements in their lives and the lives of their families. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind."
And yes, she did hold me accountable. So you'll find out that I'm big on accountability because I know that's what it takes. You know, I've said many, many times that a judge can get you clean and sober, but that's not recovery. Recovery starts when you're clean and sober, after you get out of rehab. This is when the real work starts. As Tyler said, it's work. Many treatment facilities are now called co-occurring because they're attempting to treat the damage that's done by their addiction. But these programs are simply too short to really make any long-lasting impact. 14, 28, or even 60 days simply is not enough time. But what it does do is it begins that physical healing. Real recovery requires healing. Healing those old hurts, that pain, that abuse, that neglect, that trauma that many have suffered as a child. It requires love, compassion, and empathy. And what it requires is someone to come alongside of them, someone who understands addiction, who's willing to get down in that hole with them and say, wow, it's really dark in here, and it's cold too. This is when that emotional healing begins, because someone cared. It takes a team of professionals, friends, and family who are willing to walk alongside of them through that journey of recovery. As Gail said, it's a long road. They need to love them, encourage them, and hold them accountable. You see, we need to help them change, but we can't do it for them. We need to keep them focused on their recovery as they go through this journey to rebuild their lives. Encourage them to make those major course corrections that is going to keep them on that road. Family and friends need to stay involved in that recovery, encouraging them to take those steps to rebuild their lives. They need to help them find employment, help them keep those jobs because they've lost their social skills. So we need to help them with that. We need to help them find housing, not enable that housing, but help them find it, help them pay for it, not out of our pocket, but those jobs that they now have. We need to help them get their license reinstated because through this, many of them have lost everything, including their license. And it's important for them to repair all that damage that has been created through their addiction. They need intensive outpatient care, and care is what is important. They also need to attend multiple meetings every week, 4, 5, or 6, or even 7 meetings a week, because what has happened to their brain is it's become disconnected, and it takes a long time to rewire that in consistent message to rewire those connections, to create those positive neural pathways. This is when that mental healing is beginning. But here's the part that most treatment facilities miss. Their brain is not the same brain today as it was when they got into treatment or before they got into addiction. Because their brain is no longer in control. Their addiction is in control. It's calling the shots. That wiring is misfiring. And it is important to replace those old tapes with new tapes. All of us accumulate tapes that we replay over time in our brain that tells us how to react, how to respond, what to do in this situation. And we need to replace those tapes with new tapes, new positive messages that are going to keep them focused on their recovery. We need to help them replace those old habits with new habits, replace those old friends with new friends that are good for them. The one thing that they need that is very important is new coping skills, because their coping skill through their addiction has been them self-medicating, the drugs and alcohol that has quieted their brain. If they don't learn these coping skills, the one thing that's going to happen is the first time that they're triggered, and we've seen this many, many times, is as soon as they're triggered, they pull one of those tapes. Those tapes tell them to go back to their own patterns, their own thoughts and feelings. The word addiction is derived from the Latin term enslaved by or bound to. Anyone who has struggled with addiction knows exactly how that feels and what that means. And this is especially true for our homeless population that is right out here on our street. The people that are struggling with anxiety, fear, addiction, and shame. And we need to help them heal that, but that's a long process. We have seen over and over when people get to that 2-year mark, they think, I got this, I'm good. Because now they have some confidence, maybe they're off of probation, and maybe they have a car, maybe they have a job and an apartment. They're starting to rebuild those relationships. They get cocky because I got this. But what happens is they start saying, well, I can have one beer. I can have smoked pot. And they always tell me, Ed, that's never been my problem. But here is what the problem is. The problem is they pull one of those old tapes, and that tape says, one time won't hurt. One time won't hurt. But that one time turns into 1, 2, 3, 10 times. And now they're right back where they started when they got on this journey. Now they're using every single day, they're using heroin and meth, and they're on the street, and now they're homeless again. And they're playing those old tapes. For some, they may overdose or drink themselves to death. And they're the lucky ones. Others are not so lucky because now they're enslaved, they're in bondage with their addiction. So if we're going to help them change this addiction, change that enslavement, that bondage that has held them for so long, we need to help them follow a road, that long road that Gail talked about, that is going to keep them focused on their recovery and heal those wounds, the wounds that came from their addiction and the abuse and trauma that they suffered from before. Recovery takes time, it takes accountability, and it takes responsibility. Until an individual heals that trauma, that abuse, that neglect, and they replace it with something bigger than their addiction, they don't have a chance. We must encourage them to fulfill their life's purpose. People who struggle with addiction need 3 things: hope, meaning, and purpose. Philippians 2:13 tells us, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. We need purpose. We need more programs like UGM and Teen Challenge that give them a long enough runway to develop hope, meaning, and purpose. And until we do that, we're going to continue to see the homeless population grow. We're going to see more people die. And for all of us here today, what we want to do, what our dream and our goal is to stop that enslavement that we call addiction. Thank you.